On my birthday, my childhood best friend, Luther, was a no-show. Worried something had happened, I searched all over town for him. Finally, I found him in the suite of a luxury hotel, his face flushed from drinking. The room had been elaborately decorated, and all the so-called friends I usually hung out with were there. So was a cute, plainly dressed guy I'd never seen before. The guy's name was Calvin. He was the son of an old friend of Luther's grandfather and had just gotten into a university in the city, moving here all alone from his hometown. Calvin's parents, worried he'd get bullied, had specifically asked Luther's family to look out for him. So Luther's grandpa told him to take good care of the new kid. Back then, Luther had picked at his ear and complained to me, some nerd from the sticks. So annoying. But now, Luther had bailed on my birthday to be with Calvin. Alex? Luther looked at me, clearly not expecting me to show up. I opened my mouth, but it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. You weren't answering my phone. I paused, forcing the words out of my dry throat. You didn't answer, so I thought something happened to you. Luther dug into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and glanced at it. Phone died. Sorry about that. Did you need something? Today is our birthday. Luther squinted. Is it? I've been so swamped these past few days. I've completely lost track of time. I glanced back into the room, where several people were now staring at me. I couldn't make out their expressions, but I could feel the atmosphere. My arrival was an unwelcome intrusion, an awkward interruption. Luther, however, seemed oblivious. He tilted his head toward me. Want to join? No. I turned and walked away. After a few steps, Luther caught up, his tone slightly annoyed. Seriously? Is this because I accidentally forgot your birthday party? It's not like it's a real holiday. Are you really going to give me attitude over this? Today wasn't technically my real birthday. Luther's and my birthdays are only 5 days apart, so we always pick the day in the middle to celebrate together. We'd been doing it that way for 14 years, ever since we were 7. Until this year. This year, he forgot. I rubbed my eyes. I'm not giving you attitude. I ditched a whole room of people who were there for my party to find you. I have to go back and smooth things over. Hearing that, Luther's expression softened a bit. Where's your party? Is it far? Why don't you just have everyone come over here? It'll be more fun with more people. Forget it. It's too far. I looked down, got into the elevator, and stared at him with a blank face. He looked like he wanted to say something, but just as he opened his mouth, someone from behind him called his name. He immediately answered and turned away. The elevator doors clicked shut. I stood there for a moment, then pressed the open door button. The door to the suite was already closed, but I could hear muffled bursts of laughter and cheering from inside. I slowly stepped out of the elevator and walked to another room at the end of the hall. This was my birthday party. How ridiculous. I was so worried about Luther that I'd been frantically searching for him all over the city, but he'd been here the whole time. I thought maybe this was some new prank, like he was hiding to give me a surprise. Well, some surprise. I collapsed onto the sofa in the private room. The happy birthday decorations everywhere just made me sick. Too lazy to move, I rolled over and buried my head in a pillow. Felt like my world had abandoned me. No, that wasn't right. All the people I knew, the friends I was close to, they were all part of Luther's circle. So, it wasn't that my world had abandoned me. It was that I had crashed Luther's world, and now he was kicking me out. The tears finally came, a little late. I hugged the pillow tighter. After a long time, the dead silent room was broken by a man's voice. So, can we eat the cake now? I pushed myself up, squinting through my red, swollen eyes, and looked around until I found the source of the voice. Julian Song, the golden boy of the Song family and my blind date. That morning, my older sister, the one who holds my life in her hands, had made a rare appearance at home, dragged me out of bed by my ear, and hauled me to her office. My old man is, well, in his own words, a Darwinist. He believes in survival of the fittest. He married 4 women, who in turn gave him 13 children. Now that he has 1 foot in the grave, the 4 wives and their offspring are at each other's throats fighting over the inheritance. My sister, Victoria, and I are from the 3rd wife. My mom was a maid who got by on her looks. K. Big useless. I'm a high-maintenance screw-up who can't do anything for himself. K. Little useless. To survive among the pack of wolves that is the Wei family, my sister became the ultimate overachiever. Lately, she'd been trying to close a huge deal, and to seal it, she was willing to offer me up her handsome in his prime younger brother. Before I met Julian, she lectured me endlessly, telling me I had to make a good impression no matter what. She even suggested flashing some abs or pecs if necessary. If I could just successfully seduce Julian, her position as the primary heir to the Wei family fortune would be secure. Alex, she said, cupping my face so hard my lips puckered into an O. If you dare screw this up, I will sell you for parts. But I had a birthday party today. I didn't have the guts to defy my sister, but I also didn't want to bail on Luther. So I invited Julian to my party. I thought he'd refuse. I mean, a blind man could see I was just going through the motions and didn't really want him there. But to my surprise, he actually agreed. So I had to drive him over. The car ride was silent. I don't know why he wasn't talking, but I was just stressed out of my mind. Luther couldn't stand Julian. If I brought him along without a heads up, I was bound to get an earful. But now, I glanced at Julian's face and slapped my forehead. Julian sighed. I'm seriously hungry. I scooted over to the table, swept the balloons onto the floor, found a plate and fork, and cut him a slice of cake myself. We both ate with our heads down, without a word exchanged between us. Julian is 3 years older than me. I didn't know him well, but I'd heard his name a million times. He was the classic kid every parent wishes they had. A legend of academic excellence passed down by teachers and parents. Luther hated his guts, so I hated him too. Cleared my throat. You're not telling my sister about any of this. Is that an order? I was in the wrong, so I had to back down. Consider it a request. That's not how you ask for a favor. I crossed my arms and leaned back, realizing just how annoying this guy really was. Then what do you want? You know what your sister's trying to do, right? Julian smiled. If you want me to play along, you should at least try using that pretty face of yours. I threw up my hands. I don't know how to do that stuff. You want me to do some army drills for you instead? Julian clapped his hands twice. I look forward to it. I stared at him and scoffed. Come on. You look down on people like me. You really think I could pull off a honey trap on you? Julian just smiled, not denying a word. I knew he looked down on me. To an elite like Julian, a jock like me who got into college on a sports scholarship was no different from a talking monkey. I scarfed down my cake in a few bites, stood up, and stretched. I'm heading out. I booked the room until 10 p.m. Make yourself at home. Aren't you afraid of blowing your sister's deal by treating me so coldly? I leaned one hand on the table, a smirk on my face. You look down on me, yet you let my sister set us up. I just ditched you here for 4 hours, and you waited without a single complaint. You didn't even say a harsh word when I got back. So, let me take a wild guess. My sister must have something you need, something no one else has. That's why you're putting up with all this, just to stay on her good side. Julian was silent, studying me. It was the most seriously he had ever looked at me. It was as if he'd just realized that this monkey might have a brain after all. I didn't say any more. I just waved and left the room. Not wanting to run into Luther, I glanced toward his suite. Seeing no one come out, I pressed the elevator button and headed straight for the underground garage. But just as I opened my car door, I looked up and saw Luther. Luther made a TSK sound. I couldn't tell how much of that was pure annoyance. He flicked the cigarette in his hand. Get in. I shook my head. See you around. Luther sked again, then got out of his car and deigned to walk over to me. Are you really mad? No, I was being honest. No matter how angry I'd been, half a cake had pretty much taken care of it. But once the temper and self-pity faded, all that was left was exhaustion. I'm wiped. I'm going home to sleep. Luther finally lost his patience. I already apologized, and I invited you to hang out with us. You're the one who decided to throw a fit and stay at your empty birthday party instead of coming over. Who's to blame for that? I froze, staring at him in confusion. Luther, completely oblivious to my reaction, continued, "Alex, let me tell you something. I'm not obligated to put up with all your tantrums. I'm not your mother, so I missed one birthday party. Do I need to get on my knees and beg for forgiveness? What do I owe you from a past life?" I waited for him to catch his breath before asking slowly, "So, you did know today was our birthday, and you knew my party was in the same hotel on the same floor as you, right?" Of course. I'd sent out invitations a week ago to Luther and all his friends. Even if Luther forgot, could all those people have forgotten to remind him? He'd seen right through my flimsy excuse. He just didn't care. I pressed on. "You knew that if I went back, I'd be all alone. But even so, you weren't going to do anything about it. You weren't even going to send me a text." Luther guiltily avoided my gaze. "I invited you," he mumbled. "You're the one who didn't want to come." I glanced at Luther's car. There was someone in the passenger seat. I didn't even have to guess it had to be Calvin. Luther suddenly shifted his body, blocking my view. He looked at me warily, as if afraid I might do something to hurt Calvin. Even I, as dense as I am, could see his unusual protectiveness over Calvin. It suddenly reminded me of our last winter break in high school. My family never celebrated the New Year together. We didn't have that kind of family. With 4 wives' clans involved, any gathering was a low-budget version of a Middle East conflict. Luther's parents were in the middle of a messy, loud divorce. We were both in the same boat, so to have a peaceful holiday, we decided to run away from home together. The plan was to go straight to the airport, catch an international flight, and go see the Northern Lights in Iceland. But half an hour into our escape, I realized I'd forgotten my passport. We squatted on the sidewalk, staring blankly at the icicles on the ground. "Maybe we should lower our standards," I suggested, raising a hand. "Settle for Aspen?" Luther sighed. "I guess we have to." So we switched to a train and, a few hours later, arrived in the great Northeast. Aspen was way colder than we'd imagined. Our down jackets were useless. We needed fur coats. In the snow-covered landscape, we wandered around, bundled up like burritos. Suddenly, Luther burst out laughing. I turned around, my face, already red from the wind, scrunched up. "What's so funny? You walk like a penguin." I scoffed and reminded him, "Forget penguins. If we don't find a place to stay in the next hour, I'm going to freeze into an ice sculpture." It was peak tourist season, so all the decent hotels were booked solid. After 2 hours of searching, we finally managed to book a room with 2 twin beds. As 2 spoiled rich kids, Luther and I had never stayed in such a crappy room. It was tiny, and the heating barely worked. Someone said drinking warms you up, so Luther went down to the convenience store and bought a 6-pack of beer. It was my first time drinking beer. Tasted awful, but it did warm me up. We sat together, shoulders touching, heads leaning against each other. Luther turned his head slightly, and his lips brushed against my earlobe. My body went stiff. I didn't know how to respond, but I didn't want to pull away either. Our relationship had always been like this, a fragile piece maintained under the guise of best friends, wrapped in a vague, undefined intimacy. He would make these little moves, and I'd let him, even learning to reciprocate, until Calvin showed up. He was a completely different type of guy from me, fair-skinned and delicate, with deep dimples when he smiled. Not like me. I played tennis, so I was always out in the sun. The skin under my clothes was a stark contrast to the tan everywhere else. The slightest movement revealed the toned muscles in my arms and legs. Standing next to Calvin, I didn't have to do anything to make him look frail and precious. I started hearing Calvin's name from Luther more and more, though usually not in a good way. Luther always said Calvin was clueless, broke, and dumb, but I knew Luther. He just talks a big game. His words were harsh, but he knew all of Calvin's favorite things, his allergies, and which classes he aced. We were still friends, still tangled in that same vague intimacy. But sometimes I really wanted to ask him, are we really just friends? Were all those fleeting kisses, the jokes that went too far, and the hot and cold touches just games between friends? Today, what Luther did was a huge slap in the face. But I still held on to a sliver of hope. We'd been in each other's lives for 14 years. How many 14 years does a person get? I couldn't believe those 14 years were just my one-sided delusion. I wanted to ask him. Even if all I got was a sarcastic retort, I was ready for it. But just as I was about to speak, Julian suddenly called my name. I'd completely forgotten he was there. I thought I told you to make yourself at home. Julian smiled. Well, you brought me here. The least you could do is give me a ride back. Oh right, I'd forgotten about that. Remembering he was an important client for my sister, I nodded at him. Get in. Julian didn't hesitate. He pulled open the passenger door and got in, not even sparing Luther a glance. Luther looked like he was about to explode. He grabbed my wrist, pulled me aside, and immediately started questioning me. Are you doing this on purpose? You know Julian and I have beef, yet you invited him to your birthday party without even telling me. I let out a low chuckle, throwing his own words back at him. It's not like it's a real holiday. He's here, so what? Besides, you didn't show up either. Luther scoffed. Just because you hate Calvin, just because I've been hanging out with him lately, you deliberately bring that jerk Julian around to piss me off? Alex, since when did you start playing these childish games? The humorless smile vanished from my face. I looked at him, dead serious. I don't hate Calvin. Luther was taken aback, clearly not expecting me to say that. Afraid he wouldn't believe me, I repeated, I don't hate Calvin. In the 2 years he's been here, I've barely said a few words to him. Why would I hate a stranger? So, you can stop doing that. Doing what? I chose my words carefully. Being so defensive around me. When have I ever been defensive around you? You were just now. You're afraid I'll bully Calvin, so you're always trying to keep us apart. But Luther, you don't have to do that. No matter how much of a screw-up I am, I still went through the public school system and got into college on my own merit. I was raised right and I know right from wrong. I'm not the kind of person who likes to bully people. At that, I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Honestly, I never thought I'd have to say this to you. I always thought you understood me, that these were things I'd never have to explain. What hurt the most about Luther wasn't that he always sided with Calvin, but that he thought so little of me. After all these years together, he actually thought I was some arrogant, immoral jerk. I knew Luther had a big mouth and sometimes mistook being mean for being funny, but he wasn't a bad person. He was the kind of guy who, if I got bullied, would complain the whole time but still help me fight back. He was the kind of guy who, when I was down, would drag me out to do something crazy to cheer me up. So I was willing to believe that what he said this time was just him running his mouth again. I looked at Luther, waiting for him to say something, even just an apology. But I waited a long time, and all I got was his evasive gaze. I scratched my head, still not ready to give up. Luther, did you know my sister has been setting me up on blind dates? Luther got agitated, pointing at Julian in the car. So that's your blind date? Your sister doesn't have great taste. But the Song family is a big deal. If my sister can close this deal with them, she'll be able to kick not just my half-siblings, but even the old man himself off the board. So she just sold you out like that? Luther was indignant. Your sister is ruthless. Seeing him like this made me feel a little better. I secretly glanced at Julian to make sure he couldn't hear us, then said to Luther with a sly grin, my plan is to pretend to go along with it until my sister and Julian sign the contract, and then I'm running away from home. Luther lit up. You get to screw over Julian, too. 2 birds with 1 stone. Where are you going to hide? The words came out before I could stop them. Iceland, to see the northern lights. Are you coming with me? Of course. Luther agreed without hesitation. I got excited and started giving him instructions. Bring a lot of cash. I probably won't be able to take much. No problem. Then it's a deal, I said, stuffing my hands in my pockets. Let me know when the time is set. I'll bring my life savings, and we'll run off and see the world together. See? I'd known Luther for 14 years. I knew him. When I was in trouble, he would always be on my side. But as he leaned down and personally fastened Calvin's seatbelt, the little spark of confidence I just found was instantly shaken. Ever since I met Julian, my sister had been nagging me to get in touch with him. I got so fed up that I immediately called my mom. That afternoon, my mom, decked out in gold and diamonds, stormed into my sister's office and delivered a half-hour lecture on the tragedy of being a single woman. It made my sister smash 3 cups and send me 9 long, scathing voice messages. Feeling no guilt whatsoever, I closed out of the messaging app, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. With things finally quiet, I looked up travel guides for Iceland, booked 2 plane tickets for Luther and me, and sent him the departure time. After waiting over 10 minutes, I finally got a 1-word reply from him. Okay. Satisfied, I put my phone away and went back to practice. I didn't contact Julian, partly because I genuinely wasn't interested, and partly because I was really busy. I had gotten into this decent university on a tennis scholarship, and it was now the middle of the season. I had to represent the school and win a title. I wasn't a weak player, but I always seemed to lack that final push in major tournaments. This season, I got a new coach and did a lot of targeted training, and my skills had finally improved. The week the tournament started, I cleared my head of all distractions and powered through the rounds. After every win, I would scan the crowd for Luther, but he was never there. Then, when I'd return to the locker room, dejected, I'd get a congratulatory text from him. The messages were always the same. Congrats, had to miss it. Take care. Good luck. Keep it up. Aim high. Before, I would have just laughed it off. I liked Luther, but I knew my limits. I never expected him to be by my side 24/7. But after that birthday party, I couldn't be as carefree as I used to be. Dark thoughts started to fester inside me. Jealousy, resentment, and frustration kept me up at night. I couldn't stop wondering what Luther was doing at that very moment, and who he was with, but I was too scared to ask. It felt like asking would turn me into some possessive, nagging partner. I was used to being happy-go-lucky and had no idea how to deal with these negative emotions. The psychological pressure, in turn, started affecting my performance. By the time I reached the semifinals, I was running on fumes. My opponent saw that I was exhausted and started toying with me, making me run all over the court like a monkey. I glanced at the stands. Still no Luther. But I did see Julian. And my sister. Victoria was sitting with her legs crossed, a smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were shooting daggers at me. She was here for revenge. At that moment, my clothes were soaked with sweat, and I was as tired as a dog. I had no energy to spare for them. On the final point, I gave it everything I had, leaping into the air and smashing the ball into a corner my opponent couldn't reach. When I landed, all my strength was gone. I stumbled and fell, a sharp, stabbing pain shooting through my right ankle. For a moment, my mind went completely blank. I didn't even hear the announcer declare me the winner of the set. Next thing I knew, I was on a stretcher, being carried to the infirmary. Victoria followed me in. She looked at my bandaged ankle, shook her head, and sighed. You finally made it to the finals, and I was hoping you could go for the gold this time. With an injury like this, you'll be out for at least 2 weeks. First place just got a free win. Remembering Julian sitting next to her, I asked grumpily, "What did you bring him here for?" Victoria gave me a mysterious smile. 90% of the people at a tennis match are here to watch tennis. The other 10% are here to watch the people who play tennis. You put on a good show today. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I just ignored her. I sat up, took a picture of my foot with my phone, and posted it to my social feed. Seeing that I was ignoring her, Victoria snatched my phone away, grabbed my ear, and said in a disappointed tone, You're always so close, yet so far. Get your head in the game, little brother." I tried to push her hand away, but she held me down firmly. "Give up on that kid Luther. I'm serious." I tilted my head. "You never used to care about me and Luther hanging out. That's because before, when you got hurt, Luther would be by your side. But where is he now?" I lit up my phone screen. Only a few acquaintances had left comments on my post. This time, Luther hadn't even sent a text. Victoria sat on the edge of my bed, her tone unusually gentle. "I know you're lonely at home. I'm too busy with school and work to take care of you. But you can't just grab onto anyone like a lifeline because you're lonely. I believe Luther has feelings for you, but he's not a mature or reliable person." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't find any evidence to support my case. Love is just an illusion created by a rush of hormones. If you want a long-term relationship with someone, don't just look at how he treats you when he's into you. Look at how he treats you after that initial rush fades. She then added pointedly, from what I hear, a child of a family friend has been staying with them recently. I checked my texts again. Still nothing from Luther. With him, you're just moving from one empty mansion to another. Under the blanket, my hand was clenched into a tight fist. Even if you're right about everything, what makes Julian any different from Luther? I'd end up in the same situation with him. Of course, it's different. At the very least, Julian is handsome, has a great body, and comes from a wealthy family. If you marry him, you can at least bring some benefits to your dear sister. I rolled my eyes. Has business completely warped your brain? Let's just say it has. Victoria crossed her legs and arms. Love may betray you, but money never will. And neither will family. I pulled the blanket up higher, non-committal about her words. My ankle injury was more serious than I thought, so I was transferred from the infirmary to the hospital. The doctor sternly warned me that if I wanted to continue my athletic career, I needed to rest properly and avoid any further injury. I nodded distractedly. I scrolled through my phone again. Besides a few polite get-well messages from acquaintances, no one had reached out. Not Luther, not Victoria. That woman, Victoria, talks a good game about family never betraying you. But here I was, lying alone in a hospital room with no one to even pour me a glass of water. It was always like this. Countless times, I'd wake up in the morning, wander barefoot through the villa, calling for my sister, for my mom, only to be met with echoes in the vast, empty house. I was in the hospital for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, I was woken up by a frantic ringing from my phone. It was Luther. Looks like His Highness finally saw my social media post and decided to call and offer his condolences. I thought he would at least show his face. I propped myself up against the headboard and answered the call. Before I could even speak, Luther's cold voice came through the phone. Are you insane? Huh? You said you wouldn't bully Calvin. I believed you, and then you turn around and have someone push him down the stairs. Alex, Calvin is fragile. A fall like that could have killed him. Do you know that? Luther didn't give me a chance to explain, cutting me off impatiently. Don't even try to deny it. The Lynn family already has evidence. They're going to report you. You could lose your tournament title over this. On what grounds? What did I ever do to them? Luther roared. Enough. Get over here right now and apologize to Calvin. And be sincere about it. Otherwise, I'm done with this mess. You can deal with the consequences yourself. With that, Luther hung up. I immediately checked my unread messages and found an email from the University Tennis Association sent yesterday. It said I was under investigation for a bullying incident. If it was found to be true, my title would be revoked, I'd receive a public reprimand, and I might even be suspended for a period of time. This was a disaster out of nowhere. Then Luther sent me the address of Calvin's hospital room. I looked at it and realized what a small world it was. Calvin was in the same hospital as me, just on a different floor. Luther warned me to get over there immediately, no matter what I was doing. Calvin's mother was there, and I had to apologize to Calvin in front of her. I let out a cold laugh, threw on my clothes, and went to Calvin's room. The moment I walked in, before I could even lose my temper, a middle-aged woman slapped me across the face. The force of it made my head whip to the side. I was already unsteady on one foot, and the blow nearly sent me to the ground. I'd lived in that messed-up way family for over 20 years, and no one had ever dared to slap me. I straightened up and scanned the room. Calvin was lying in bed, his forehead wrapped in thick gauze, his arm and leg in casts. He was pale and clearly in bad shape. Luther was sitting next to him. Luther's parents were there too, looking at me with disapproval and blame. The woman who had just slapped me must have been Calvin's mother. There were 2 other people in the room, Rick and Henry, both of whom I knew. I rubbed my cheek, a burning sting spreading across the skin. That woman really didn't hold back. I looked at her coldly. What gives you the right to hit me? The right? I'm Calvin's mother. And my son is in this state because of you. Why can't I hit you? If your family won't teach you a lesson, then I will. I let out a derisive scoff. When did Calvin get hurt? Luther's father answered, the night before last. Oh, I crossed my arms. So you're saying that I, who injured my ankle the afternoon before that and was recovering in the hospital, hopped on one foot across half the city to Calvin's school just to push him down the stairs? Calvin's mother pointed her finger at my nose. You still dare to argue? We already have the evidence. Then please, by all means, show me this evidence. I'd love to see it. Calvin's mother turned to Luther. Luther, show him the video. I glared at Luther, almost grinding my teeth to dust. Luther stood up, walked over to me, and played a video. In the video, Rick and Henry cornered Calvin at the top of a staircase and started verbally abusing him, accusing him of taking my place. Their words were sharp, telling Calvin to know his place and get lost. Calvin looked helpless. He tried to push past them, but they grabbed his hair. After a struggle, the two of them pushed him down the stairs. After watching the video, my expression didn't change. The video clearly shows Rick and Henry pushing Calvin. What does that have to do with me? Luther said, why would they go after Calvin if you didn't tell them to? I laughed, mocking both Luther and myself. My gaze swept over to the two guys cowering in the corner. Their heads hung low. What? Did they say I ordered them to do it? Are there any chat logs or recordings? Calvin's mother cursed, you gutless little bastard. Every other word out of their mouths was about you, about getting justice for you, telling my Calvin to stay away from Luther. Are you telling me you had nothing to do with it? After yelling at me, Calvin's mother, still not satisfied, turned her anger on Luther. When I entrusted my son to your family, all I wanted was for him to be safe. You promised me he would be, and then you turn around and bring him this much trouble. Do you have any idea that if Calvin had landed on his head, he would be dead? Luther, my son isn't unwanted, and he's not desperately chasing after you. If you didn't want him around, you could have just said so, and we would have left. Luther frowned and tried to calm her down. Auntie, please don't worry. I have no intention of abandoning Calvin. Then he grabbed my wrist. Apologize. Now. I yanked my arm away with such force that the back of my hand slammed into the doorframe with a loud thud. I looked straight at Calvin's mother and said sharply, I'll say it again. I didn't tell anyone to corner him. If I really hated him, I'd do it myself. Luther lost his temper, his voice rising. Rick and Henry are your lapdogs. Everyone knows that. I smiled. Then tell me, in all the years we've known each other, have I ever ordered them to teach someone a lesson for me? Luther froze silent. I answered my own question. No. Every fight I've ever been in, I fought myself. Every score I've ever settled, I settled myself. I rubbed my face and sighed wearily. The only reason I know Rick and Henry is because they're your friends. If knowing them is a crime, then Luther, you're closer to them than I am. I hopped forward a couple of steps and looked calmly at Rick. I remember you telling me that you and Calvin are in the same class, that he gets better grades than you, and that a spot in a competition you'd been preparing for a long time was given to Calvin at the last minute. Rick's head dropped even lower. I turned to Henry, and I remember you complaining to me that the girl you like wrote a love letter to Calvin, and you thought it was unfair. Henry turned away, unable to meet my eyes. I smirked. You both had personal grudges against Calvin and wanted to teach him a lesson. But you were too cowardly to admit the real reason, because it would make you look pathetic. So you used my name. Humph. My bad luck for ever knowing you. With that, I turned back to Luther, looking at him sideways. You say they're my lapdogs, but when have you ever seen the three of us hanging out together? Every time I see them, they're trailing behind you like puppies. Rick, Henry, even Calvin, they have nothing to do with me. Just like that birthday party. If you hadn't been there, the room would have been empty. Before Luther could say anything, I turned to Calvin's mother. If you want me to apologize, fine, I'll apologize. Not because I admit to bullying Calvin, but because you're a shameless, sanctimonious bully yourself. You hit me without knowing the facts, but because you're my elder, I can't hit you back. You didn't bother to find out the truth and just decided I was guilty, reporting me to the tennis association to get my title revoked and smear my name. You pretend to be so high and mighty, but your actions are lower than the scummiest street thug. I've really seen what your so-called cultured family is all about. With a mother like you, it's no wonder your son is so plagued with misfortune. I guess that's your karma. I hopped to the door and, before leaving, added, "You want to report me? Go ahead, bring your so-called evidence. Alex's way may not be much, but I can afford a lawyer. Let's see if your bark is worse than my bite." Calvin's mother was screaming insults behind me, but I couldn't be bothered anymore. Once outside, I leaned against the wall and slowly hopped forward. My right foot hurt even more, and my face was starting to throb. It was probably swelling up. I finally made it to the elevator, only to have a hand clamp down on my shoulder. It was Luther. He had followed me out. He frowned. That was too impulsive. Don't you know Calvin has a sister who's an influencer? They were planning to post about this online to expose you. Once public opinion turns against you, the association will have to punish you no matter what. What will you do then? Quit tennis for good? I leaned against the wall and smiled nonchalantly. It almost sounds like you're saying you made me apologize for my own good. Alex, if we weren't friends for so many years, I wouldn't give a damn about you. Friends? I savored the word. I felt my eyes starting to burn. Luther was still rambling on, trying to convince me to go back and say a few soft words. She hit me just now. Didn't you see that? Luther fell silent. The hallway was suddenly quiet. I looked down at my ankle. I'm injured too. Didn't you see that? You're different from Calvin. How are we different? I looked up at him. Don't we both have two eyes, a nose and a mouth? Don't we both feel pain and bleed when we're hurt? Don't we both feel wronged when we're falsely accused? Luther tugged at his collar in frustration. I mean, the severity of your injuries is different. His mom has always been a gentle person. The only reason she's so furious this time is because Calvin's injuries are really serious. If two people, claiming to be getting justice for Calvin, pushed me down the stairs, would you refuse to listen to Calvin's side of the story and force him to apologize to me? Don't make up hypotheticals. You didn't answer my question. I paused. No, wait. You already have, in a way. He wouldn't. Not that he wouldn't make Calvin apologize to me. It's that he believed Calvin would never do something like that. But in his eyes, I would. I pushed myself up and pressed the elevator button. Go back and tell the Lynn family that I will never admit to something I didn't do. If they want to ruin me, they can try. Luther took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. You say you have no reason to hurt Calvin, but you do. I looked at him with interest, waiting for him to continue. It's because of me. You think you're losing me, so you want to get rid of Calvin, the third party who crashed our relationship. So, is he a third party between you and me? There was a coldness in Luther's eyes. If you go back and apologize properly, then he isn't. Are you using our 14 years of friendship to threaten me? Luther didn't speak, which was as good as a yes. I looked at him, my smile widening. I value our relationship a lot. You really should have used it to bargain for something more valuable. With a ding, the elevator doors opened. I struggled to get in and said, in a very, very serious tone, "Goodbye, Luther." Luther blocked the elevator door, his expression almost frantic. Alex, you better think this through. You have a terrible temper, you're selfish and stubborn. Who else would ever like you besides me? He was right. After 14 years together, Luther knew me well. I had a lot of flaws and very few friends. I liked him a lot. I relied on him. If he left, he would take my entire world with him. He knew all of this, yet he still chose to use the thing I cared about most to force me to submit. For all these years, he'd hidden behind the word friend. For all these years, he'd never acknowledged the feelings between us that went beyond friendship. This was the first time he had ever broken that silence, and it was for Calvin. My lips trembled uncontrollably. I tried to keep my voice steady. Even if no one likes me, I can still be just fine on my own. Luther finally gave up. He took 2 steps back and gave me a long, hard look, as if he was deeply disappointed in me. Funny, I felt the same way. Just before the elevator doors closed, a hand shot in, forcing them open again. Julian walked in and stood beside me. When did you get here? Julian held up a plastic bag. I was sent on a mission to visit a patient. I came upstairs just in time to see a certain injured but determined individual ignoring doctor's orders and getting out of bed. I was curious, so I followed and witnessed a great show. I felt like cursing, but today's drama had drained all my energy. I just asked coolly, was it a good show? Deeply moving. I ignored the sarcasm in his voice. Thanks for coming to see me. I repaid you with a deeply moving performance. We're even. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Julian just smiled. As we got out of the elevator, he put a hand on my arm to steady me. No need to thank me. As your fiancé, it's my duty to take care of you. I was stunned. I looked around, and after confirming I was the only other living person within a 30-foot radius, I asked him, fiancé? Since when? 3 minutes ago. I told your sister I'm very pleased with you, but you're still in school and too young. So we can have an engagement party first and get married after you graduate. Who agreed? Who allowed it? Who approved it? My voice got louder with each question. Julian replied, I agreed, both our parents allowed it and your sister approved it. I shook off his hand. What century is this? Still pulling this arranged marriage crap? You think just because Luther and I are on the rocks, I'm gonna put myself on the clearance rack? Julian glanced at my hand. Your hand is hurt. I paused and looked down. My little finger was already turning purple. I must have hit it on the doorframe when I yanked my hand away from Luther. I guess I was too angry to notice. Julian wrapped an arm around my waist, helped me back to my hospital room, and called a nurse to treat and bandage my wound. After all that fuss, I finally calmed down. I asked him, why the sudden engagement? Is it because of Luther? Julian seemed surprised by my conclusion. What does he have to do with it? You and Luther have always been at odds. Are you trying to use me to piss him off? If so, you can forget it. I'm not that important to Luther. Julian pulled up a chair and sat by my bed. If life is a race, I only see the people running ahead of me. Luther is behind me. When you play tennis, you probably don't care about the players ranked outside the top 10, do you? Suddenly, I understood why Luther hated Julian so much. So how did someone like me, who's running even slower than Luther, catch your eye? Julian smiled without saying a word, as if savoring a memory. After a long moment, he said, maybe it was after watching you play tennis. I suddenly felt like, you have a nice grunt. I rolled my eyes. When we tennis players hit the ball, we often let out a shout to generate more power. Some sound epic. Others sound like they belong in an R-rated movie. I'm one of the quieter players. I usually don't make a sound unless I can't help it. But in that last match, I was so exhausted that I let out a couple of grunts. If I'd known it would attract a pervert, I would have just thrown the match. To be honest, Julian said, taking out the lunchbox he'd been carrying, before today, my impression of you was just a pretty but clingy follower trailing after Luther. But you really impressed me just now. You've got guts. With that, he handed me a box of sweet rice cakes. Your sister said you liked these. The thought of Luther killed my appetite. The things I'd said to him earlier were all heartfelt. Cutting ties with him wasn't an impulsive decision. Ever since Calvin appeared between us, I had a feeling this day would come. I just hadn't been willing to admit it back then. When Julian saw that I wasn't taking the food, he didn't get angry. He just placed it on the nightstand and said slowly, an unhealthy relationship is like a piece of rotting flesh. It hurts to cut it off, but if you leave it, the rot will spread. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you handled it very well. I thought I made a pretty ugly scene back there. Julian shook his head. No, you defended your dignity. I covered my eyes as tears finally rolled down my cheeks. Julian didn't say anything more, just sat there quietly with me. After a long while, I asked in a muffled voice, have you ever met Calvin? Twice. He's in my department at school. My voice was choked with tears. Is he better looking than me? Smarter? More likable? Julian shook his head. None of the above. Then why? Julian was silent for a moment before answering softly. Because people never cherish what they get too easily. I cried silently for a while, then wiped my face with my sleeve, picked up the food Julian brought, and started eating ravenously. Once I was full, I called Victoria and briefly explained what had happened with the Lynn family's complaint. As soon as she understood, She immediately contacted her legal team to handle it for me. I'm not one to start trouble, but I'm not afraid of it either. The worst-case scenario was losing my title and being suspended. I never loved tennis that much anyway. Without it, my life would go on just the same. Just like without Luther, I could still like myself just fine. Julian said to me, "If you need help, you can call me anytime." I nodded and thanked him insincerely. The moment Julian left, I went online and started ordering everything I needed to run away from home. I still planned to hide out in Iceland. It didn't matter if Luther wasn't with me. I would have a great time on my own. In that remote little country, I would have a wonderful time. The consequence of not being financially independent is that the moment I finished packing my runaway luggage, my sister showed up at my door. "You little idiot," Victoria said, gently patting my cheek. "You don't even know how to clear your browser history after you go online. Do you? With your level of intelligence, you're going to be eaten alive." I was being held down by two huge guys, unable to move. The humiliation was unbearable. Victoria smiled sweetly. "Don't struggle. Even if you die today, you're going to do it after the engagement ceremony." With that, I was forcibly changed into a suit and taken to the engagement party. The party was grand, split into two parts. The first half was the announcement of the business partnership between the Song family and my sister, followed by a ball. The second half was my official engagement to Julian. My flight to Iceland took off while the party was still stuck at the ball. I shuffled around, my eyes darting everywhere, trying to find a chance to slip out in the crowd. But Victoria, having anticipated my plan, had stationed guards at every door. I couldn't find a single opportunity. I squatted dejectedly in a corner, nibbling on the food, which tasted like wax. Bored out of my mind, I started observing Julian, my fiancé in name. He was flitting between different groups of people like a social butterfly. He was the perfect businessman, always smiling, his words flawless and impeccable. He was perfectly fake. In comparison, everyone from the Wei family, including Victoria, seemed a bit out of their league. This business deal and marriage were undoubtedly a case of my family marrying up. Now that the deal was done, Victoria's status as the heir was set in stone. The rest of the family had no choice but to accept it, no matter how unhappy they were. Thinking of Victoria, I suddenly realized I hadn't seen her for a while. She had disappeared after signing the contract with the Song family in front of all the reporters. I had no idea where she went. I stayed put for half an hour, only getting up once to stretch my numb legs. Julian came over to say hi at one point, but I gave him the cold shoulder. Julian, ever the good sport, didn't hold it against me and went back to his duties. Finally, the ball ended, and it was time for my engagement. The lights dimmed, the host began his opening speech, and soft music started to play. Just then, Victoria, who had been missing for so long, finally reappeared. She stood beside me and asked, "Still unhappy? Would you be happy if you were suddenly forced to get engaged to someone you barely know?" Victoria squatted down next to me in the corner, an awkward position for her in an evening gown. She began to speak slowly. "He didn't go." I was stunned, looking at her in confusion. Victoria continued, "I went to the airport. I waited there until your flight took off. I finally understood." Victoria meant that Luther hadn't shown up. I had bought 2 tickets, one for me, one for Luther. It was our pact to run away to Iceland to see the Northern Lights. A dream that we couldn't fulfill when we were young, and couldn't fulfill now. I was a little confused. "You left the party just to confirm that?" "Yes." "Why?" "I've never liked Luther. In your relationship, he was always so condescending. But as long as you liked him, it wasn't a deal breaker. When you told me you two had a falling out, I actually had a sliver of hope for him. If he had just been willing to swallow his pride this one time, just once, I would have thrown away this deal and let you have your 14 years. But he never came." I took Victoria's hand. "You didn't have to do that. I'm really, truly over Luther." Victoria squeezed my hand back. For so many years, in the Wei family, we had always had each other's backs. Victoria continued, "The old man favors sons, but the sons from the other 3 wives are all duds. You're the only one who inherited mom's good looks. He had high hopes for you, but you liking guys made him lose face. His methods are always dirty, and I don't know what he would do to you. So I had to prove your value to him. Bringing the Song family's business to the Wei family through marriage is the greatest value you have in his eyes. I had never thought of that. While I was wasting my time at school, torn up over Luther, I had forgotten that Victoria, only 6 years older than me, was already navigating the treacherous waters of the business world. It's okay if you don't like Julian. You're only engaged for now. The wedding won't be for another 5 or 6 years. In that time, I'll do everything I can to grow the company. If it comes to it, we can just call off the wedding. I nodded. It's a plan. Then it's a deal. Deal. Victoria and I stood up together and, surrounded by the crowd, walked toward the center of the stage. Just as she said, family never betrays you. After the engagement, my life didn't change much. The Lynn family's complaint was dismissed by the Tennis Association due to lack of evidence. To get back at them for me, Victoria reported Calvin's mother, who was a university professor. The incident caused her a lot of trouble. I went back to my usual routine, classes, then tennis practice. When I had free time, I played games or scrolled through my phone at home. I didn't block Luther, but I made a conscious effort not to think about him. Over time, I suddenly realized that life without Luther wasn't as terrifying as I had imagined. Time doesn't slow down for anyone. At the end of the semester, my grades improved, and coupled with a silver medal in the National College Tennis Tournament, my overall academic performance was looking pretty good. To celebrate, my sister doubled my allowance. Just as I was wondering how to spend my summer break, Julian invited me on a trip to France. Even though I was planning to run out on the marriage eventually, we had just gotten engaged, so I couldn't be too obvious about my real intentions. I didn't have any particular love for Europe, but I was free anyway, so I happily accepted. Julian booked an entire floor of a hotel with a fantastic view of the Eiffel Tower. But being a person with no sense of romance or aesthetics, I had zero interest in that hunk of metal. I spent my days cooped up in my room, playing video games. Julian paced back and forth in front of me a few times, unable to take it anymore. "Don't you want to get to know me?" he asked. All my attention was on the game. I barely heard him and just mumbled, yeah, you're right. I know. What do you know? Julian stood in front of the TV screen. I cleared a whole month to spend with you, and in the last 3 days you've looked at me for a total of less than an hour. I leaned to the side, craning my neck to see the screen past his body, my hands never stopping. Julian ground his teeth and gave his final warning. "Don't make me pull the plug." That got my attention. I quickly paused the game. "I know you very well. Or rather, I know your type very well." "Oh?" Julian sat down next to me. "And what type is that?" "You're smart, you get great grades, and you achieve conventional success with ease. In short, an elite. And me? I'm a lazy bum whose only assets are a handsome face and a fit body. We're from 2 different worlds, and we'll never fit into each other's. Can't we just be a business-only couple with no feelings involved?" Julian seemed confused. "We're getting married. How can we maintain a marriage if we're both doing our own thing?" I stroked my chin. "Weren't your parents an arranged marriage too? Do you think they're deeply in love?" Julian replied seriously, "I think they love each other quite a bit." I leaned back on the sofa, at a loss. Julian glanced at my controller, then at the screen, and asked tentatively, "How about I play with you? Do you know how?" "No," Julian shook his head honestly, "but I can learn. I'm a fast learner." An hour later, I was on my knees in front of the screen, staring at the black and white game over message in a state of utter madness. How could anyone be this bad at a game? I stood up, trying my best to control my emotions. "Didn't I tell you to dodge? Why didn't you run?" Julian shrugged. I couldn't move. I was stunned by his attack. Covered my face. "Just give up, Julian. You don't have the talent for this." Julian clasped his hands together. "Give me one more chance, coach." I gritted my teeth and played with him for another 2 hours. When I finally put down the controller, I felt like my soul had been cleansed. Victoria never liked me playing video games. She thought it was a waste of time and tried many ways to get me to quit, but she never succeeded. But Julian, this man, had managed to make me develop an aversion to gaming in just one afternoon. I went from excitement to exhaustion to utter misery. My mood swung from high to low, then lower and lower and lower, and Julian, by the end of it, actually seemed to be getting addicted. I stood up, stretched my numb butt, and was about to go out to the balcony for some fresh air when Julian grabbed my collar. "Now, isn't it your turn to do something I like?" I pouted, a look of disgust on my face. My refusal was overruled. I was forced to listen to him read a novel for 40 minutes, some world classic called Love in the Time of Something or Other. I was completely lost. To help me understand the character relationships, Julian even asked the front desk for a giant sheet of paper and drew a family tree on it. In this family tree, at least 3 people had the exact same name. What was this even about? By dinner, I still hadn't recovered from the afternoon's trauma and had a long face the whole time. Julian sighed heavily and put down his knife and fork. A fancy hotel, a candlelit dinner, and catering to your interests, none of the 3 worked on you. You're a really hard person to please. Being called out like that made me a little embarrassed, so I suggested, instead of forcing ourselves to accept our differences, why don't we look for some common ground? Julian thought for a moment and said, "I actually quite like playing video games." "Forget it," I said, rejecting the idea flat out. "I've already quit." Julian propped his chin on his hand, thought for a bit, and then asked tentatively, "Then, tennis?" The next afternoon, we were on the hotel's rooftop tennis court, dressed in our tennis gear. "Have you played tennis before?" Julian replied, "I know a little." I looked at the muscles in his arms and legs. Though not as developed as mine, they showed clear signs of training. I thought he was just being modest. After a few rallies, I realized he was being completely honest. When he said he knew a little, he really meant he knew just a little. During a break, I sent Victoria a text, subtly asking if my bailing on Julian in France would affect her business. Victoria, who was pulling an all-nighter at work, instantly replied with a knife emoji. I shrank back and patiently continued to play with the young master. But in the time it took to grab a drink of water, the ever-sociable Julian had already brought over 2 French guys. Just met them. They asked if we wanted to play doubles. I scratched my head. No big deal if we lose, right? It's just for fun. Don't worry about winning or losing. Julian reached out and pulled me up. They're like us, 1 pro and 1 amateur. Just aim for their pro. I sized them up. One was white, the other black. The white guy had a typical gym body, while the black guy looked like a professional. I nodded in agreement. The match started, and the black guy and I were relatively restrained at first, mindful of the 2 amateurs. But soon, he got into it and started playing without holding back. To protect my sister's big client, I had to sacrifice myself and take his shots. Gradually, I started to warm up too. After half a set, I was drenched in sweat and had been aced 3 times in a row. Damn it, I cursed under my breath, and my game became more aggressive. I had only ever played in domestic tournaments and had rarely faced international players. The black guy's skill was definitely a level above what I was used to. When I was really getting into it, I looked back and saw that my teammate, Julian, and his counterpart, the white guy, were leisurely sipping coffee and enjoying the breeze on the sidelines. I walked over, took the water he handed me, drank half, and poured the rest over my head. The French sun was brutal. I felt like steam was rising from my head. After shaking my hair out, I looked at Julian, still a little out of breath. "When did you stop playing?" "When I couldn't return the ball anymore." Julian draped a towel around my neck. "You 2 were so into it, we didn't want to get in the way." He suddenly reached out and touched the muscle on my arm, his fingers sliding from my shoulder to my elbow. Tickled, and I instinctively flinched. Just as I was about to say something, his hand was gone. I shifted my shoulders uncomfortably. "By the way, is your foot okay?" I jumped up and down on the spot. "It's been fine for a while." Julian and the 2 French guys huddled together, chattering away in a language I couldn't understand. The 2 Frenchmen kept glancing at me. I couldn't understand a word, so I just gave Julian a heads up and went for a walk. When I got back, the 2 French guys were gone. Julian had packed up our things and pulled me along. "Let's go eat." I had used up a lot of energy that afternoon and wolfed down my food at dinner. In contrast, Julian ate slowly and methodically. How was that black guy this afternoon? He was really good, I said honestly. I've played a lot of matches back home, but I've never faced anyone that skilled. He could have beaten me easily. He's 19. My chewing paused. Impressive. You're a good loser. I shrugged. It's not like I've never lost before. Am I supposed to jump off a building after one loss? Having a good attitude is a good thing. That's where you're wrong. My coaches have always criticized me for not having enough drive. They say the top players are obsessed with winning, that losing a match is worse than death to them. Someone like me who doesn't react to losing is just a slacker. A slacker attitude, a slacker performance. Julian put down his knife and fork. I watched your match. In the second half, your stamina was clearly dropping, but you didn't give up. In fact, you got more and more fired up. You call that not having drive? I just smiled and didn't say anything. Julian added, if you were properly prepared, do you think you could have beaten him? I thought about it carefully. I could have lost less miserably than I did today. But winning wouldn't be that simple. Tennis seems like a simple sport, a court, a racket, a ball, but it's actually incredibly expensive. Behind every professional tennis player is a whole team. Have you ever thought about going pro? I shook my head. Going pro isn't something you can just decide to do. There's a guy back home I grew up playing against. I lost to him more than I won. If I hadn't injured my foot in the last tournament, I would have been facing him for the gold. He's wanted to go pro his whole life, but do you know what his international ranking is? Julian listened intently. 187th. Not even in the top 100. Someone like me doesn't stand a chance. Julian smiled. Everything you've said is about weighing the pros and cons. What I asked was whether you want to do it. Why are you suddenly asking this? Julian shrugged. No special reason. I just feel like you really like tennis. Like it? I'd never thought about that. I chose to play tennis because my coach said I had talent. On the court, I could win. If someone told me I could never play tennis again, I guess I'd just shrug and move on. Does that count as liking it? Shouldn't liking something be like in one of those sports manga, where you're hugging a racket all day long? Thinking of this, I said to Julian, for all these years, I've just treated tennis like a job. Julian smiled. The fact that you can use that analogy proves you've never had a real job. Do you even know what having a job feels like? Then what does liking something feel like? I leaned back in my chair. For me, liking something means it makes you happy, satisfied, and at peace. But tennis is exhausting. You can't eat this, you can't drink that, and you have to train every day to stay in shape. I'm still young, but I've already got a bunch of aches and pains. Wouldn't going pro be even more miserable? Julian considered this for a moment, then said, your theory isn't wrong, but I think nothing in life only brings you positive feelings. There will always be some negative aspects, and liking something means you're willing to choose it, even with the downsides. What kind of twisted logic is that? Julian smiled at me. There's no logic to liking something. I thought about it silently for a moment, then stuffed a piece of steak in my mouth. I didn't like talking to Julian. Every time I did, I felt like I was being forced to use my brain. He always made me think about things I'd never paid attention to before. So, after dinner, I went back to the tennis court by myself. It was mostly empty. The court was brightly lit by the floodlights. I found an empty spot and started hitting balls against the wall. After practicing on my own for an hour, I finally stopped, wiping the sweat from my brow with my sleeve. When I turned around, Julian was sitting nearby, watching me. He was sitting with his legs crossed, watching me intently. I walked over to him. Going pro is a lot of work. Julian replied, everything is a lot of work. I said, I'm already 21. For an athlete, 21 is old to be starting a pro career. Julian said, I looked it up online. Some players don't break into the top 100 until they're 25. You're only 21. You're still young. I said, tennis is expensive. I'll need a fitness coach, a skills coach, a nutritionist, a sparring partner, and more. Julian said, I have money. If you don't want to take it from me, you can borrow it. I said, the old man says tennis is useless. Julian paused. The old man? You mean your dad? I nodded. Julian smiled. A few years ago, your dad said artificial intelligence had no market. Look how that turned out. I gripped my racket tightly. So, should I give it a try? Okay. After deciding to go pro, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if my life suddenly had a purpose. I sent a text to Victoria, telling her to put a team together for me. She replied with a short Oklahoma emoji. I tossed my phone aside, grabbed a clean bathrobe, and hopped into the shower. After a full day of tennis, my clothes were soaked with sweat. The steam from the hot water made me a little dizzy. I closed my eyes, tilted my head back, and let the water cascade over me, flowing down my body to the floor. After a long exhale, I opened my eyes and saw Julian standing in the doorway. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, his gaze lingering. I was startled. What are you doing here? I thought you were inviting me in. I laughed, leaning one hand against the wall. What did I do to give you that impression? You didn't close the door. I swept my hair back, closed it. I just didn't latch it. Then I made a shooing gesture. But to my surprise, Julian didn't retreat. He advanced. He walked slowly toward me, the water soaking his clothes. You're really captivating when you play tennis. My expression didn't change, but my ears started to turn a little red. As a good-looking guy, I was well aware of my looks. I'd heard 1,000 compliments, if not 100. But the way Julian complimented me, his tone, his words had a quality I couldn't quite describe. If I had to put a name to it, it was desire. If he weren't so handsome, I would have called the cops. Julian got closer and closer until his body was pressed against mine. His hair was dripping wet, which only made his features look sharper and more handsome. You can push me away, Julian said. I knew I could. As an athlete, I was strong. If I really wanted to resist, Julian wouldn't be able to hold me down. But today, I don't know what came over me. I just instinctively felt that I didn't need to push him away. Julian slowly tilted his head, watching my every subtle movement. If I showed the slightest hint of discomfort, he would stop. But I was like a paused video, completely still, until his lips met mine. In that moment, a strange thought popped into my head. So this is what a real kiss feels like. Not a fleeting touch, but something that seeps into your bones. I had never experienced anything like it, from the initial awkwardness, being led, to the later curiosity and exploration. I finally understood why guys my age were so obsessed with this stuff. It was actually pretty fun. Late at night, Julian finally got up, releasing me from where he had me pinned against the headboard. He rolled over and lay beside me, looking like he was done for the night. I licked my lips, savoring the feeling, then threw off his blanket and straddled his waist. I asked him, "How much older are you than me again?" Julian was a little shocked. He glanced at the marks all over my body, then answered, 3 years. I nodded. So you shouldn't be too old to be out of energy yet. I could feel Julian's shock. His romantic history probably hadn't included anyone like me. After a long pause, he couldn't help but ask, "How does an energetic athlete like you manage to stay celibate for so long?" I didn't really think about the question at the time. I was too busy doing crunches. After a full night's sleep, my brain finally started working again. The main reason I'd been celibate was because Luther was occupying the spot without doing anything with it. Speaking of which, I hadn't thought about Luther in a long time. My relationship with him was always shrouded in a hazy affection. It was like a fruit wine, sweet and sour, making you a little dizzy if you drank too much, but not enough to get you drunk. What he and I had was a kind of young, innocent love. With Julian, it was pure lust. I had a senior in college who was obsessed with girls. He once tried to smuggle his girlfriend into the dorm in a suitcase during a tournament. He got caught and was publicly shamed by the whole school. He graduated 2 years ago, but the coaches still bring up the story. I figured it would be used as a cautionary tale for years to come. At the time, my coach warned me that lust is a distraction and that what makes humans superior to animals is our ability to control our desires. Now, I think that's all bullshit. Question the senior, understand the senior, become the senior, surpass the senior. I chewed on my fork, frowning and staring at Julian. Julian shifted uncomfortably. What are you looking at me for? How big of a suitcase would it take to fit you? Julian looked at me with a face full of confusion. He got up and ruffled my hair. I have a meeting. It should take about an hour and a half. I'll hang out with you after. He then added a serious warning. Don't come barging in shirtless. I nodded dismissively. So what if I walked in on his video conference without knocking when I was looking for him yesterday? Big deal. He's so sheltered. If he spent more time at the gym or on the track, he'd see shirtless athletes in their compression shorts warming up everywhere. But since he was good in bed, I could tolerate this minor flaw. Overall, the summer break was pretty good. We didn't return home until the week before school started. I was really reluctant to leave, as if this was our last day together. Julian helped me put my luggage in the car and then said goodbye. I grumbled a bit to show my dissatisfaction. Julian patted my cheek. You're acting like a horny player right now, and you're acting like a player who hits it and quits it. You get what you want and then run. Julian chuckled. Who got the better end of that deal? I tilted my head. When are you coming to see me? I was supposed to be back last week, but I postponed it for a week because you were unhappy. I've already fallen way behind on work. I pushed his hand away and got into the car. I get it. Busy. Just like my dad, my mom, and my sister. Julian leaned down and knocked on the window, signaling for me to listen. I rolled down the window, waiting to see what he had to say. He said I didn't want to bring this up so soon. I had no idea our relationship would develop so quickly. I have an apartment pretty close to your school. If you miss me, you can come find me. He reached into his pocket and handed me a key. I hesitated for a moment, then took it and looked up at him. Can I go any time? Julian nodded. My mood lifted a little. Julian said, now that you're going pro, your training is going to be tough. Good luck. Yeah. When school started, I threw myself into training. Victoria was quick. My team was already starting to take shape, and the training load increased significantly. Victoria came to see me a few times, and each time she asked the same question. Have you been in touch with Julian lately? Julian. I was training at full capacity every day, with no energy left to think about anything else. Julian seemed busy too. I hadn't reached out and he hadn't come to see me. Even though we were technically engaged, our relationship was more like a fling. When we were together, we were passionate. When we were apart, it was like we'd never met. After some thought, I sent him a text, telling him that I would be making my professional debut next Wednesday. He replied that night, promising he would be there. Before the match started, I scanned the audience, but there was no sign of Julian. I frowned, a little annoyed, but I quickly let it go. Businessmen are busy. Just as I was about to look away, I saw someone unexpected. Luther. I hadn't thought about Luther in a long time. At first, I had to consciously stop myself from thinking about him, avoiding anything that reminded me of him. Over time, it became a habit. Slowly, his face and voice began to fade. Seeing him again today brought back that familiar feeling of helplessness. I sighed and looked away just as he raised his hand to wave at me. I could guess what Luther was up to. He used to do this all the time. After doing something thoughtless, he'd give it some time to cool down and then act like nothing ever happened, trying to smooth things over with a joke. If I held a grudge, I was being petty. If I pretended to be over it, I had to swallow my anger. He'd successfully pulled this move many times, like the matches he promised to attend but never did, the dinners he bailed on halfway through, the kisses he cut short to go hang out with other friends. But this time, what happened between Luther and me wasn't as simple as a missed game, a bailed dinner, or a quick kiss. His condescending attempts to make peace meant nothing to me. After all, I was engaged now. I searched for Julian again, but he was still nowhere to be seen. My coach patted my shoulder, reminding me it was time to go on court. I wiped my face with a towel and walked onto the court amidst the cheers of the crowd. After the match, I was completely exhausted, barely able to walk to the locker room with my assistant's help. I had won by a narrow margin, but I'd had a great time. A smile was still on my face, the mental exhilaration overriding my physical fatigue. You really enjoyed that match. I looked up. Julian was sitting on the only bench in the locker room, smiling at me. My assistant, taking the hint, discreetly left. I scoffed. You just got here, didn't you? You sound very sure of yourself. I quickly took off my shirt and, shirtless, wiped the sweat off with a towel. I've seen this move a million times. Something suddenly comes up, you can't make it on time, so you just slip in during the commotion at the end. Then you throw out some generic compliments like great game or what a match to make it seem like you watched the whole thing. Julian thought for a moment and asked, "Do you get brushed off like that often?" I nodded. Basically, the moment they open their mouths, I know what bullshit is about to come out. Does it make you angry? I answered honestly, there's nothing to be angry about. Everyone's busy. As an adult, if someone is willing to put in the effort to make up an excuse for you, it means they already value you a lot. What you should be afraid of are the ones who can't even be bothered to make an excuse. Like Luther. Eventually, he stopped even showing up, just sending a text as a token gesture. Julian smiled and took a camera out of his bag. I don't know much about photography, but I could tell it was a professional-grade camera. He showed me the pictures on the screen. Will this prove my innocence? As he flipped through the photos, I saw myself, frowning, shouting, the muscles in my arms clearly defined. I may not be good at playing tennis, but I know how to watch it, and I know how to photograph it. Would you say that counts as a shared interest? I felt a little embarrassed. I admit I had been taking my anger out on him. I said I wasn't angry, that there was nothing to be angry about, but I was still emotional. After all, this was my first professional match, and of course I wanted someone there to support me. But my mom was on vacation abroad, and Victoria was so busy with some contract that she wasn't even replying to my messages. I scrolled through my entire contact list and finally settled on Julian, my fiancé. And not only did he come, but he watched intently and even took pictures. Julian's fingers traced my jawline. You're so easily moved. Look at you, so easy to win over. He leaned down, his lips brushing the back of my ear. I shivered, a ticklish sensation running through me. I had to admit, after all this time apart, I kind of missed him. No wonder they say a taste of something good leaves you wanting more. I was finally learning what that meant. But these intellectual types were so slow. He was taking forever to get to the point. Impatiently, I turned my head, grabbed his collar, and bit his lip. He was stunned for a moment, then immediately wrapped his arms around me. His hands, slick with sweat, slid down my back and into my shorts. Julian's eyes darkened. I told you before, I have an apartment near your school. I knew what he was implying. As a young, virile athlete, I was just getting a taste for this sort of thing. It was one thing not to think about it, but now that he brought it up, I was definitely interested. But I had to debrief with my coach later, and I had another match in 2 days. I really didn't have the time, so I said, let's wait until after the tournament. Julian smiled. Then it's a date. When Julian was leaving, I walked him to the parking lot. Just as he was about to get in his car, he stopped and walked back toward me. I thought he was going for a goodbye kiss, so I leaned in toward his lips. But he froze, stunned. I stopped too. We were very close, our eyes locked. Julian's eyes crinkled into a smile. He curled his fingers and plucked a tiny thread from my hair. It was probably a stray piece of lint from the towel I'd used to violently dry my hair earlier. I stared at the white thread, a little embarrassed. I reflected that my mind was in the gutter. Julian stood up straight, fixed my collar, and said, I have a meeting the day after tomorrow. I can't get out of it, so I won't be able to watch your match. I understand. Victoria's small company kept her busy. It was no surprise that Julian, whose family business was dozens of times larger, was swamped. The fact that he could find time to be my photographer was already a big deal. Julian held up the camera. When I get the photos developed, help me pick a good one. I nodded. Julian opened his mouth as if to say something else, but then swallowed his words. I watched him leave. It was strange. Even though Julian and I had done everything there is to do, there was still a barrier between us. Whatever, I scratched my head. No point overthinking it. It was a long shot whether this engagement would even lead to marriage. I stretched, planning to grab a bite and then find my coach to go over the match. A casual glance, and I saw Luther. He was leaning against the hood of his sports car, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes fixed on me through the curling smoke. Luther walked toward me, casually extinguishing his cigarette. Happy engagement. His voice was cold. He was congratulating me, but his expression was anything but warm. I knew he was angry. I couldn't help but find it a little funny. I hadn't said a single word to him all day, yet I'd still managed to piss him off. I gave a slight nod. Thanks. I started to walk away, but Luther paused for a moment, then hurried to catch up. The Song family is a big deal. Victoria must have made out like a bandit. She did, I said, my tone devoid of any annoyance. The way family fortune will probably be all hers now. Last semester you were talking about running away from home, and now you're all lovey-dovey with your fiancé? I replied coolly, people's feelings change. One day you might be head over heels for someone, and the next day you might be thinking about someone else. Luther was speechless. Julian is handsome, successful, wealthy, and has a good temper. It's only natural to develop feelings for someone like that after spending time with him. Seeing Luther's face grow darker, my tone became lighter. As they say, comparisons are deadly. If I have a bowl of shark fin soup in front of me, why wouldn't I eat it? Should I choose glass noodles instead? At this, my tone shifted. Oh, my bad. I forgot you have peculiar tastes. You prefer cheap glass noodles. I stepped into the elevator and, seeing his speechless expression, smirked. If you have no comeback, I'll be on my way. As the elevator doors slowly closed, my smile faded. It seemed like I had won the war of words, but every time I saw Luther, I felt exhausted. It was an unconscious defense mechanism. I didn't want to seem vulnerable in front of him. It would make me feel like I had lost. I covered my eyes with one hand and let out a slow sigh. A dull ache still throbbed in my chest. So many years of feelings couldn't be let go of that easily. I tried to list Luther's flaws. Arrogant, narcissistic, selfish. But as I did, I kept remembering him standing up for me, him silently comforting me with an arm around my shoulder when I was sad. When did this Luther start getting close to Calvin? The elevator had been stopped for a while. I realized I had forgotten to press a floor button. I ran a hand through my hair in frustration. Just as I was about to press the button, the doors dinged open again. Luther was standing outside. He looked at me uncomfortably. The day before your engagement, I went to see Julian. I was surprised. I didn't expect him to say that. I told Julian that I wouldn't let you get engaged to him. Julian asked me in what capacity I was stopping it. My throat felt tight. And how did you answer? I said it didn't matter what capacity. As long as you weren't happy about it, the engagement was off. On the day of the engagement, I tried to find you, but my dad deliberately gave me a ton of work to do. By the time I finally got free, the ceremony was over. I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Even now, Luther was still avoiding the question. So I looked up at him. I'm not unhappy about it. Luther took a step forward and grabbed my wrist. I want to hear the truth. I'm telling you the truth. But Luther stubbornly pressed. Who are you afraid of? Victoria? Or Julian? Our family might not be on the same level as the Songs, but if I go all out, they won't want to burn bridges with me. You don't have to worry. I sighed deeply. Luther, don't you get it? No one is stopping us. We're the ones who can't go on. Julian and I are doing fine. Let's just leave it at that. Luther scoffed and let go of my hand. And here I was, still holding out hope for you. Huh? I didn't understand. We had one fight and less than 2 weeks later, you're engaged to Julian. We were on a break for one summer, and you're already all over him. Alex, what did our years together even mean? You're always looking down on Calvin, but during this time, he's the one who's been by my side. When I was at my lowest, where were you? Oh, right. You were in France, living your best life with Julian. I couldn't help but laugh. As far as I know, your parents are healthy, and as the only son, you don't have any succession battles to fight. So what exactly is this lowest you're talking about? Stress from school? Trouble with your internship? Or is it that your best friend, who used to follow you around like a puppy, got engaged to someone you hate, and that made you uncomfortable? From the look on Luther's face, I'd hit the nail on the head. Pain? What does a rich, only child like him know about pain? Calvin has been with you. How long has he been with you? A summer? A semester? A year? But what about me? How long was I with you? I was with you for 14 years. 14 years. The words rolled off my tongue again. Suddenly, all those years felt meaningless. Since we're already on this topic, let me be even clearer. On the day of my engagement, Victoria went to the airport. She waited for you. She said that if you showed up, she would let it all go. But you didn't. Julian asked you in what capacity you were stopping the engagement. If you had just said you were stopping it as my boyfriend, Julian, with his pride, would have paused the engagement. But you said nothing. Luther, to this day you still only say we're just good friends. But if I'm just your good friend, what were all those moments we shared? If we're just good friends, why do you care who I get engaged to? You only met Calvin in your freshman year of college. It hasn't even been 4 years. 4 years is just a fraction of 14, but you remember every little detail of your 4 years with Calvin, yet you've forgotten how we spent our 14 years together. So, Luther, let's just end it here. I won't ask you to celebrate my birthday with me every year, or come to every one of my matches, or take me with you whenever you go out. And you don't have to feel burdened by protecting and indulging me. Let's just let each other go. Every time someone asked you what we were, you would always dodge the question, being vague. I would just wait on the side, accepting whatever you said. But today, I'm going to be the one to define our relationship. We were once each other's best friends. It's just a shame that you found other friends, and I gradually stopped needing you. We never dated. We were just entangled in something ambiguous. From now on, we're just acquaintances. We can say hi, make small talk, and then go our separate ways. As for Calvin, I'll say it again. I don't hate him. I don't even know him, and I don't want anything to do with him in the future. And Julian, we're doing great right now. If things don't work out, we'll part on good terms. I glanced at my phone. The coach was rushing me. I gave him a distant but polite nod. Thanks for coming to my match today. You don't have to come anymore. I know you've never liked tennis. With that, I pressed the closed door button. I had imagined this final, dramatic confrontation with Luther many times, but I never thought that when it actually happened, I would handle it so well. Thinking about it, the gloom that had been hanging over me suddenly lifted. The moment I walked onto the court, I sensed something was off. It felt like a lot of hostile eyes were on me. I paused and looked around. Tennis isn't a huge sport in this country, so matches without big-name players are rarely sold out. But today, the stadium seemed unusually crowded, and everyone seemed to be paying extra attention to me. I told my coach that something felt wrong. He just thought I was nervous and patted my shoulder encouragingly. I had come this far, I couldn't just back out now. So, I gritted my teeth and walked onto the court. After a few games, I found my rhythm and pushed the unease to the back of my mind. But just as I was about to go for a smash, my vision suddenly blurred. My footing faltered, and when I landed, a sharp pain shot through my eyes. I covered my eyes, and involuntary tears streamed down my hands. Someone in the crowd was shining a laser pointer at me. I struggled to open my eyes and signaled to my coach. Seeing my distress, some people in the crowd started to cheer, the noise gradually building into a roar. I could make out a few words. Spoiled rich kid, bully, pathetic simp. Of that list, I only admitted to being a rich kid. At my coach's strong insistence, the referee ejected the person with the laser pointer. But the overwhelming boos and jeers couldn't be silenced. My coach protested several times and even asked to postpone the match, but my opponent refused. The suntan player grinned at me. These people are clearly here for you. I don't know what you did to piss them off, but it's not my fault or my problem. I'm not paying for it. What a realistic adult world. Even if I overcame the discomfort in my eyes, the constant booing and cursing would affect my mood. The more it affected me, the bigger his advantage. My coach wanted to argue further, but I stopped him. The other player was right, he shouldn't have to pay for my problems. The person with the laser pointer had been kicked out so the match could continue. I'm the kind of person who responds to kindness, not coercion. So, for the rest of the match, I endured the stadium-wide insults and won several points in a row. Eventually, even the people cursing at me ran out of energy, and the court fell silent. In the end, I won the match. As I left the court, I blew a few kisses to the crowd. A sparse round of applause echoed through the stadium. It seemed there were some normal spectators who, like me, were confused by the sudden influx of hostile guests. Back in the locker room, I lay back on a chair with a cool towel over my eyes. My assistant whispered in my ear, "Found it. Man, last night, an influencer went live, saying you ordered 2 people to bully a male student and then used your family's power to cover it up." After a moment's hesitation, he continued, "They also said your motive was that you were fighting with that student over a guy." I took the phone and skimmed the comments. They were full of filth. After just a few glances, my temples started to throb. "Tell Victoria to handle this. Sue whoever needs to be sued." "We can't sue." Victoria pushed the door open, her face grim. I shot up. "This is slander, isn't it? Why can't we sue?" I watched the influencer's live stream. He never mentioned you by name. He just used vague language to lead the audience on. The comments were likely coordinated with him. He would just say things like "that's right," or "you guys are right." Even if we took him to court, as long as he denies everything and claims he was agreeing with other comments, we can't charge him with slander. Then let's sue the people who wrote the comments. Victoria Said. "Don't you see? These people are targeting you. The slightest misstep will bring their entire marketing machine down on you. If you sue the commenters, even if you win, the tabloids will just say you're going after the small fry instead of the source, that you're a bully, that you're abusing your privilege." And Victoria didn't finish, but I could guess the rest. I had just gotten engaged to Julian, and now this huge scandal had broken out. The damage to my reputation would not only affect my family's business, but also the Song family. If the Song family was unhappy, the contract we had just signed would be difficult to execute. I sat back down. So what should I do now? First, deal with the person who used the laser pointer. That's assault. We can't salvage your reputation right now, but we need to make an example of someone to scare them off from trying anything physical. As for the rest, Victoria rubbed her temples. I've hired a PR firm. I have a meeting with them later. Until we come up with a plan, don't do anything. This was probably the Lynn family's doing. I remember Luther saying Calvin has a sister who's an influencer. Victoria said bitterly, "Influencers make money by being shameless." We've really stepped in it this time. The next day, they made their next move. A newly registered account appeared out of nowhere and posted a bunch of my chat logs with Luther. During the time Luther and I were in that ambiguous phase, our chats had plenty of flirty messages. They took them out of context, added some leading commentary, and created a persona of a thirsty, hot-headed, and stupid rich kid. The public's attention was immediately drawn to this bizarre story. I have my own social media account, where I usually just post training-related content. I don't have many followers and don't really manage it. After this incident, my account was flooded with people leaving nasty comments and sending vile private messages. I just logged off. Out of sight, out of mind. The internet was in an uproar, but the tournament had to go on. There were no more malicious incidents like the laser pointer, but the cursing and booing continued. The organizers increased security to maintain order, but these people were like rats block one hole, and another one pops up. For the past 2 days, the organizers had been run ragged and were starting to get annoyed with me. From their perspective, I was the one causing all this trouble. Victoria's investigation had turned up a lot. The influencer who broke the story and Calvin's sister, Chloe, were from the same MCN and were good friends. It was almost certain that the two of them had conspired together. Chloe wanted revenge for her brother and mother, and the influencer wanted clout. The PR team's advice was to first issue a statement denying the rumors, stating that we reserved the right to sue, and then remain silent. Silent? I scoffed. Victoria crossed her arms, rubbing her temples. That's right, we have to stay silent. They've spent so much money, hired a whole network of bots and shills to constantly post about you, and even trended on social media several times. But you're basically a nobody. You have no fame, and that influencer isn't a top-tier one either. So the hype is limited. To keep the heat on, they have to keep spending money. With their limited resources, how long can they last? 2 weeks at most, and it'll die down. I was unwilling to accept this. So we're not going to fight back at all? Of course, we'll fight back. But timing is everything. We could hire our own army of trolls to attack the influencer now, but all he has to do is say he's being targeted for telling the truth, and the public will believe that all the accusations against him are just our revenge. Even if we find real dirt on him, it won't be much use. It will just solidify your image as a lawless rich kid. If they use that to their advantage and accuse you of being a bully and oppressing the lower class, it'll be even harder to clear your name. Victoria patted my shoulder to comfort me. You have to strike a snake at its weak point. Taking down the influencer isn't important. Taking down the person feeding him is the key. I know you're frustrated, but you have to understand. He's leaking your private information and spreading vicious rumors to force you to respond. If you respond, the hype will continue. Seeing that I had calmed down, Victoria hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Have you contacted Luther these past few days?" I blocked him. My chat logs could only have been leaked from his side. He had to be involved. The thought of the carefully worded messages I had sent him over the years being used as a weapon against me made me sick to my stomach. Victoria nodded. Good. I used to think he was just arrogant and had a bad temper, but other than that, he was okay. Now I see he's just a lowlife. Don't think about this stuff. Just focus on your matches. If it gets to be too much, you can just withdraw from the tournament. We're still young. There will be other competitions. Withdraw? I clenched my right hand. No way. Why should I withdraw? I've always been a lazy person, just going with the flow. My original life plan was to be a student athlete, get a college degree, and then get a powerless, cushy job in the family business, a rich, lazy bum. Going pro was the biggest decision I had ever made in my life. I had finally mustered the courage, finally made up my mind. Why should I give it up for this bullshit? I don't have to. I stretched my arms and legs. I have a match at 3 this afternoon. I'm gonna go train. When I stepped onto the court again, I could feel the hostile glares from all around me. The insults and curses filled my ears. I paused for only a moment before striding forward. Like I said, I don't respond well to being pushed around. He wanted me to be miserable, to break down, to have my reputation and career ruined. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The most captivating thing about competitive sports is that everything comes down to skill. A win is a win, a loss is a loss. No excuses. No matter how much they tried to make people hate me, they couldn't take away my skill. Throughout the match, every point I lost was met with cheers, and every point I won was met with curses. When I finally won the match, half the crowd looked like they were at a funeral. I broke into a huge grin, as bright as the morning sun. I loved seeing them hate me but be unable to do anything about it. This season, I finally won the championship. When I held the trophy and stood on the podium, those bored people tried the same trick again, booing me. A few creative ones even held up banners to protest. I just smiled and raised the trophy above my head, laughing without a care in the world. They thought cyberbullying would scare me, make me bow down. But they were wrong. Only rats in the sewer are afraid of the light, and my conscience was clear. Despite the ups and downs, my professional career was off to a good start. The only downside was that the person I wanted to see wasn't in the crowd. Victoria was busy fighting my battles, and Julian. After the tournament, I gave myself a week off. During that time, the online mob was still relentlessly looking for trouble. They even got a group together to report me for using performance-enhancing drugs. They had no evidence, just a baseless accusation, which was, of course, dismissed. The official organization released a statement confirming my drug test was clean and my championship was legitimate. As a result, their official account received an unprecedented amount of traffic, with the comments section filled with personal attacks. Eventually, they were forced to disable comments and private messages. People say fans of pop stars are vicious, but I think fans of influencers are just as bad. Victoria was so busy she was completely off the grid. My mom, on vacation abroad, heard about the situation and, for once, called me to tell me to look on the bright side. So what if I was being cyberbullied? If you can't beat them, join them. I could just quit tennis and become an influencer, go live every day and argue with people, turn on the donations and rake in the cash. I was deeply moved. Then I hung up on her. Ha! A mother's love. I tossed my phone aside, collapsed on the sofa, and drifted off to sleep. I didn't wake up until the sun was setting, my mouth dry. In a daze, I suddenly remembered an ordinary afternoon back in France. I had woken up from a dream to an empty, frighteningly quiet room. My head was still foggy, and I thought I was back at my own house. I groggily got out of bed, calling for my sister and my mom as I walked out, but no one answered, just like every other day for the past 20-odd years. They were busy. I understood. Compared to many people, I was lucky to be born into a wealthy family with a capable sister. I couldn't have both money and constant companionship. I sighed deeply, rubbing my sleepy eyes, and was about to go wash my face to wake up. A little lonely, but it was okay. I was used to it. Just then, Julian walked out of the next room. He had been working, and only came out when he heard me. I looked at him, a little confused, and then slowly remembered why he was there. "You're awake?" Julian pinched my cheek. "I told you to go to bed early, but you didn't listen. You slept through breakfast." I tilted my head and looked at him without a word. Julian said, "I saved you some breakfast. It'll have to do for now. I'm almost done with work. I'll take you out for a big meal later." With that, he went back to work. I quickly washed up and ate the breakfast Julian had prepared. Seeing his door half open, I suddenly got an idea and pushed it open. Julian was sitting on the sofa, his laptop on a stand. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing a small section of his firm forearm. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. I grabbed a pillow, snuggled into his arms, and rested my head on his lap. Julian didn't stop me, just shifted his body to let me find a comfortable position. His hand rested on my cheek, gently stroking it before he went back to work. I didn't bother him and he didn't push me away. I just lay there, listening to the sound of his keyboard, and drifted off to sleep again. All these years, all I ever wanted was for someone to be with me. I shook my head hard and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Damn it, I kind of missed Julian. He hadn't contacted me once during this whole time. I was his fiancée, for God's sake. With all this going on, shouldn't he at least check in on me? But I quickly let it go. Julian and I had no real emotional connection. The marriage was arranged because my family was desperate, and he had a momentary lapse in judgment. We weren't even married yet, and I was already embroiled in a huge scandal. I'd heard from Victoria a few days ago that the Song family stock had dropped. I wondered if it had anything to do with me. Looking at it that way, Julian was the real victim in all this. Logically and emotionally, I owed him an explanation. If he couldn't handle it and wanted to call off the engagement, I had nothing to say. With that in mind, I opened Julian's social media feed. He had just posted 5 minutes ago. He seemed to be at some fancy restaurant. I immediately made a decision and drove over. Honestly, Julian, posting your location when you're out to eat, even down to the private room number? He had no sense of self-preservation. While waiting at a red light, I scrolled through his posts from the past week. He posted his whereabouts at least once a day. I had no idea what was wrong with him. As I walked into the restaurant, I came face to face with Luther. We both froze. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. I should have checked my horoscope today. I hadn't even done anything, and my day was already ruined. Luther looked flustered. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I walked right past him without a second glance. He hesitated for a moment, then turned and followed me. It wasn't me who leaked the chat logs. I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. Right, it wasn't you. It was me. I'm just a masochist who loves being humiliated. Luther grabbed my arm, his voice urgent. I really didn't know about it. Those are our chat logs. Why would I leak them? Am I crazy? I yanked my arm back, his nails leaving a red scratch on my skin. I'm not in the mood to play games. Go back and tell Calvin, his shrew of a mother, and his influencer sister that their whole family can have you. If they want to fight over a guy so badly, they can have a loser like you. You're a waste of food, but if they like you so much, they can take you in and raise you. Why are you talking like this all of a sudden? Luther ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I really didn't leak the chat logs. When your sister came after me, I was just as shocked as you. I can say worse, I said, turning to him. Luther, you know damn well that the chat logs could only have been leaked from your side. Even if you didn't do it yourself, it's been days. If you actually cared, with your resources, couldn't you have shut this down by now? Luther guiltily looked away. Even though I had long given up on him, I was still a little disappointed. I really don't get it. When I was with you, you found me annoying and were hot and cold with me while doting on Calvin. Now that we're done, you're ignoring Calvin and clinging to me. Luther, what do you want? Luther was speechless. I continued, I'm engaged now. By letting these rumors fly, are you trying to assert your dominance? Or is this just petty revenge? Or is it because my fiancé is Julian and you want to piss him off? Whatever the reason, it's incredibly childish. I never thought that. We have so many years of history. You can't just end it like that. I just wanted to provoke you, to make you come to me, even if it was to fight. Luther sighed. But you didn't come and you blocked me. I scoffed. You could have come to me. That would be so embarrassing. I rubbed my temples, a headache coming on. I was insulted by an entire stadium. I was turned into a character in dirty jokes online. I had a laser pointed at my eye during a match. I didn't do anything wrong, but I had to go through all that. In your eyes, is all of that less important than your pride? Luther's lips tightened. I had rarely been so aggressive, and he was clearly struggling to keep up. But soon, his embarrassment turned to anger. I already apologized. What more do you want? Apologized? I cleaned out my ear. Have you said the words I'm sorry even once? In that moment, my patience with Luther reached its limit. Let me tell you something. Alex's way may not be much, but I know how to fight back. You want to play dirty? I can be dirtier. With that, I turned and stormed off. But after a few steps, I still wasn't satisfied. So I turned back. Luther was surprised to see me return. He opened his mouth to say you, but I cut him off with a flying kick that sent him to the ground. I beat the crap out of him. He used to be a decent fighter, but ever since he traded his fists for books, his skills had plummeted. I had him pinned from start to finish, until 2 restaurant employees pulled me off. I looked down at Luther, who was a mess. I had gotten my revenge. Now, I said, we're even. The restaurant staff knew who I was and didn't dare call the police. I went upstairs and found Julian's private room, but hesitated before knocking. Maybe I should have prepared a script so I wouldn't be at a loss for words. Just then, the door opened. Julian looked at me, his eyes widening for a second. Julian licked his lips, lowering his voice. What are you doing here? I said, suddenly nervous. I came to see you. Julian's expression was much softer than I expected. He closed the door behind him and said, I just saw Luther downstairs. I know. I saw him too. The mention of Luther made my tone sharp with annoyance. Did you two talk? I sneered. What is there to talk about? I'm in this mess because of him. As I said that, I realized I had dug myself into a hole. So I added pointedly, he's the one to blame, so there's no need to talk to him. But for certain innocent parties who got dragged into this, they should be given a chance to explain. Julian's eyes crinkled. So you came to explain things to me? I nodded. Luther and I had a thing, but by the time I got engaged to you, we were completely over. I know that. Victoria told me not to say too much about this whole thing, that the more I say, the worse it gets, and it just fuels the fire. That's why I've been silent except for the official denial. I know that too. Since you know everything, are we good? No. Julian stuck his hands in his pockets, looking surprisingly nervous. After this happened, why didn't you tell me? I looked down. I was embarrassed. This whole mess is because of my messy love life. It's one thing for my reputation to be ruined, but I dragged you into it too. You could have asked me for help. That would have been so abrupt, I said, staring at my toes. Besides, you didn't contact me either, because I was afraid I'd be overstepping. After all, we've only known each other for a few months. I wasn't sure where I stood with you. I was afraid that if you thought about it, you'd still decide Luther was more important than me. I looked at him in surprise. Julian gave a wry smile. You and Luther are childhood sweethearts. What are you and I? Lust at first sight? Julian's face went rigid. He clearly didn't get my joke. So I quickly tried to salvage it. Love at second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth sight? Julian laughed, and the tension eased. It wasn't because I saw you play tennis and wanted to sleep with you that I agreed to the marriage. The fact that you play beautifully did make me attracted to you. But I really decided to get to know you after I heard you and Luther arguing at the hospital. My performance in that fight was mediocre. That's a pretty flimsy reason. Julian rubbed his brow. I told you there's no logic to liking someone. I nodded. You should have seen the fight in the stadium parking lot. That was my masterpiece. Oh? How so? Heartfelt, and every word was a stab to the heart. Julian's smile grew wider. And what about the one downstairs just now? I told Luther that if he wants to play dirty, I can be dirtier. So how are you going to play dirty with him? I held my breath for a long time before admitting. Okay. I made that up to sound tough. I don't know how to play dirty, and I don't know how to deal with him, so I went back and beat him up. Julian's expression went blank for a few seconds, and then he burst out laughing. I cleared my throat, embarrassed. My tournament is over. Is your previous invitation still open? Of course. Julian took my hand. Let's go now. But you're still having dinner with someone. It's fine. I'll just send a text. Speaking of texts, I remembered his social media posts. You're a rich kid. You should be more careful about your privacy. You should post less of these things that give away your location. It's fine. For the past 2 weeks, my posts have been visible only to you. I gave him a sideways glance. You went to all that trouble. You could have just come to find me. I wasn't confident enough. I couldn't help but ask. What if I hadn't come to you? It's not like I don't know where you live. If you hadn't come to me today, I would have come to you tonight. I asked hesitantly, wouldn't that be embarrassing? I don't do things that are all about pride and no substance. Hearing that, for some reason, I felt a sense of relief. We went to the parking lot. For some reason, Luther was still there. He was leaning against my car, clearly waiting for me. I rolled my eyes and said to Julian, let's take your car. I didn't want to get entangled with Luther, but for some reason, Julian suddenly pulled me in for a kiss. I was caught off guard and instinctively wrapped my arms around his neck. After the kiss, he said in a voice loud enough for all three of us to hear, your sister's strategy is right. They're trying to ruin your reputation with rumors and scandals. If you respond too much, you're just helping them get more attention. So for now, you have to stay quiet. But I won't let you suffer in vain. I've been having people gather information these past few days. It's okay if you don't know how to play dirty. I do. Those who want to get famous off of you, I'll make sure they have no fame to get. Those who want to make money off of you, I'll make sure they have no money to make. Trust me. I was a little dazed, but I nodded. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine in a deliberately possessive way. After we got in the car, I belatedly realized that Julian's little show was a declaration of dominance. I held it in for a while, then finally managed 2 words. Childish. Julian didn't argue. I've been mature my whole life. Let me be childish just this once. You'll have to bear with me. Julian and I went at it for most of the night before he was finally satisfied and released his grip on my thighs. I sighed. My thighs would probably be covered in bruises tomorrow. My muscles are solid, but my skin is sensitive. I probably wouldn't be able to show my face for a few days. Julian lay on his side next to me, his hand resting on my stomach. He was quiet for all of 2 minutes before his hand started wandering down my torso. He whispered in my ear, how long of a break do you have? A week at most. Is the schedule that tight? No, it's just my daily training. I rested my head on my arm, my eyes closed. I rented a gym. I'm there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. Is it far from here? It's out in the suburbs. Julian nodded. I can buy a house in the suburbs. I laughed. Why go through all that trouble? You can just move into my place. That works too. Julian closed his eyes. The room fell silent. Such a boring, simple conversation, but I liked it. Life isn't always about dramatic events, it's mostly just about the daily grind. I liked the way Julian discussed these things with me. It made me feel like we could go on living this peacefully forever. I got up and gracefully swung my legs off the bed. Julian was almost asleep, but my movement startled him awake. "Why are you getting up?" "To take a shower," I replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Julian watched my brisk retreat, a look of disbelief on his face. "You're not tired at all?" "I am. I just needed a minute to recover." Julian propped himself up, looking like a jilted lover. "So, I give it my all, and that's only worth 5 minutes of rest for you?" I finally understood what he meant. I had shattered his male pride. I walked back and patted his shoulder comfortingly. "Think of it this way. I'm a professional athlete. The fact that you can make me rest for 5 minutes is actually pretty impressive, considering you're an amateur." After comforting him, I glanced at his face. It was a little pale. When I came back from my shower, he was sitting up in bed, bolt upright. I didn't think much of it, just lifted the covers, lay down, and closed my eyes, ready to sleep. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard him ask in a gruff voice, "For building endurance, is cardio effective?" Victoria had failed because she couldn't prove that the influencer and the account that leaked my personal information were working together. Even if I won a lawsuit against the accounts, it would be meaningless without going after the source. But Julian succeeded. His family owned an entertainment company, and they easily cut off the MCN's cash flow. Thanks to Julian and Victoria's efforts, the police released a public statement detailing the cause and outcome of Calvin's bullying incident, specifically noting that there was no evidence linking me to it. My lawyer and I both reposted the statement and formally filed defamation lawsuits against the influencer and numerous other accounts that had spread rumors and insults. With the police backing me up, public opinion began to shift. Even the influencer changed his tune, claiming his friends had told him the story and he didn't know if it was true. He said he was just sharing it as a story and never expected it to cause such a negative social impact. He even released an apology video. That afternoon, his account was banned on all platforms. For an influencer, exposure is money. With his account banned, he not only lost his livelihood, but the brands he had signed with would also start suing him for breach of contract. As for the donations he had received from his live streams, he would have to pay it all back in the upcoming lawsuits. It was exactly as Julian had said. If they want clout, take away their platform. If they want money, take away their income. As for Calvin, both Julian and Victoria felt it was best to leave him alone. In this whole affair, Calvin was, after all, a victim of school bullying. Even if his family's actions were extreme, most people would find them understandable. So, they shifted their focus to helping me rebuild my image. Half a month later, the drama had completely died down. The public's attention had already moved on to more scandalous gossip. My social media accounts, aside from a few die-hard believers in my supposed bad character, were mostly filled with positive comments, and the overall traffic was minimal. This was the kind of attention a regular person like me should have. On my graduation day, I went back to school to get my diploma. There, I ran into Luther again. He had changed a lot. You could say he looked haggard, or you could say he looked more mature. When he looked at me, his gaze was calm. He walked up to me and said hello. I gave him a cold look. "You don't go to this school, do you?" He ignored my question and asked, "Did you move?" During the second semester of my senior year, there were hardly any classes, so I stopped going to campus altogether and moved into my house in the suburbs, living a life of training from 10 to 6. Unconsciously, Julian's things had filled my entire house. By now, we had been living together for over 2 months. Luther gave a bitter smile. "I went to your old place, but it was rented out to someone else. I tried to call you, but I found out you had blocked me. I just came here today to try my luck. I didn't expect to actually see you. Do you need something?" Luther stuck his hands in his pockets. "Didn't you say we were just acquaintances? If we're acquaintances, why did you block me?" That was before my reputation was destroyed. "Now we're not speaking. Got it?" Luther sighed. "The chat logs were leaked from my side, but I didn't do it. Chloe, Calvin's sister, did it when I was drunk. She used my fingerprint to unlock my phone and secretly recorded them. I had promised to help Chloe get into the entertainment industry for Calvin's sake. After this happened, I pulled her funding. Chloe is still a minor, so even if we sued her, the punishment wouldn't be severe. so I convinced her mom to send her to military school. I was surprised. Sending a girl to military school, isn't that a bit harsh? She used her age as an excuse to do whatever she wanted. If she doesn't pay a price, who knows what kind of trouble she'll cause in the future. I thought about it and he had a point. This happened to me and I'm not a sensitive person. With Victoria and Julian's support, I got through it relatively unscathed. But if it had been someone with weaker mental fortitude, they would have been devastated. I promise you, Calvin and his mother weren't involved. In fact, once the MCN company took over, even Chloe, the one who started it all, couldn't control the situation. If you're still not satisfied, I can have Calvin and his mother come and apologize to you right now. I shrugged. No need. I wasn't interested in empty apologies. As long as they stayed away from me, I'd be grateful. Are you telling me this because you're afraid I'll retaliate against Calvin? Luther looked at me, stunned. I sighed. Let me repeat myself. I have no interest in Calvin. You always think I see him as the other woman, but you don't have to. No matter what role Calvin played in this, the reason Luther and I ended up this way was because Luther's heart had strayed. So I never hated Calvin. I just found his family annoying and wanted to avoid them. Calvin is planning to go back to his hometown to work after graduation. I shrugged. Uninterested. I'll be staying here and officially joining my family's company. I was a little surprised. After he finished, an awkward silence fell between us. We had nothing more to say. I didn't like the atmosphere, so I turned to leave, but Luther suddenly spoke up. Back then, why were you so sure that your feelings for me were romantic? I looked at him, stunned, and instinctively glanced around. Julian had said he would attend my graduation ceremony. I didn't want him to get the wrong idea. After I made the move, I realized I wasn't cheating. Why was I so guilty? Luther saw my reaction and gave a helpless smile. Sorry, but I've been holding this in for a long time. I was happy when I was with you. We played together, talked about everything, and were completely wild. I had the urge to kiss and touch you. But when it actually happened, it felt wrong, even a little awkward. If I loved you, why would I feel that way? Why would Calvin make me waver? If I don't love you, why was I so upset when I found out you were engaged to Julian? For the sake of him being my first love, I answered him. There's no logic to liking someone. I just knew. You know me, I'm simple-minded and don't like to overthink things. I can't answer your questions. You have to figure this out for yourself. Figure it out for myself? Luther let out a soft laugh. Calvin said the same thing. You all say the same thing. I glanced at the time. I have to go. Luther spoke anxiously. If right now Luther, I interrupted him. We're not in a position to have this conversation anymore. I put on my ugly graduation cap and walked into the auditorium. When the dean called my name, I went on stage amidst cheers and applause. As I took a photo with the president, Julian was in the audience, snapping away with his camera. For someone so young, his hobbies were getting more and more like an old man's. After the ceremony, a few friends invited me out for drinks. I let Julian know and happily joined them. Half drunk, I glanced at the time. I had less than 40 minutes before Julian's curfew. I sobered up instantly, quickly said my goodbyes, and called a car to go home. I could hear my friends teasing me from behind, calling me whipped. I didn't have time to argue. I rushed, urging the driver on, and just barely made it home on time. Julian was watching TV in the living room. When he saw me, his expression was neutral. For the mild-tempered Julian, this was the sourest face he could muster. I casually tossed my jacket on the shoe cabinet in the entryway and sat down next to him. Julian asked me, "Did you have fun with your friends?" It was all right. Was Luther there? It was a gathering of my classmates. He's not my classmate. I tilted my head and leaned against Julian, asking pointedly, "Have you been resting well these days?" "Pretty well." Hearing that, I straddled him and started happily tearing at his clothes. Julian fought me off, protesting, "Can you please not be so obsessed with my beautiful body and care a little about my soul?" I made a pained face and climbed off him. "What boring novel did you read this time?" Julian grinned. "Don't worry. I made a PowerPoint presentation so you could understand it." Before I could throw a tantrum, Julian said, "Since you can have such a deep conversation with Luther, I assume you'd be willing to have one with me. Looks like he saw us this afternoon after all." Sigh. I let out a long sigh. After graduation, I officially became a professional tennis player. During the season, I traveled the world for tournaments, and Julian was always by my side. When I trained, he worked remotely from the hotel. When I competed, he was in the stands watching. During the off-season, I went back home and lazed around, while he went to the office from 9 to 7. As the wedding approached, Victoria asked me, "Still calling it off?" I shook my head. I was like a capybara being slow-cooked in a hot spring. It wasn't uncomfortable, so I might as well put a towel on my head and keep soaking. Victoria said, "I just had a business meeting with Luther last week. He's matured a lot. Looks like he's still single." I nodded. "Have you seen Luther recently?" I thought for a moment. I had seen him once. Last week, Julian dragged me to see a movie, a cinematic masterpiece adapted from one of his favorite literary gems. I ate through the first half and slept through the second. We argued all the way out of the theater. That's when I saw Luther, leaning against his car, smoking. We nodded at each other and then passed by. Victoria studied my face. Seeing that I had truly let go, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. A few years later, Julian's parents retired, and he became a bona fide CEO. And I, at the ripe old age of 28, finally broke into the world's top 100. Victoria hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "You're finally going to make some real money." I was half dead in her arms, too tired to lift a finger. Julian stood there with a camera, snapping away at me. "How's married life?" "It's all right, I guess. Whether that counts as happy or not, I can't say. I just know that I haven't felt lonely in a very long time."